There were so many different culture shocks. The first one being Singaporean Indian food, which is actually very different from what Indian food really is. By that I mean they have things like murtabak, which is like a dosa sandwich, and it has like eggs and meat inside. There's also something called roti john, which is similar to murtabak, but I think it has a lot more like sauces on top. And then there's all of these different types of dosas, like they've got strawberry dosa, chocolate dosa, kaya dosa, all kinds of new types of dosas that I've never heard of. So another thing that really surprised me about Singapore was just how honest people are. And by that, I mean, like if you leave something lying around, it's likely that no one will touch it. So I remember once I went to the library and I went to the bathroom, I was washing my hands, I left my phone on the countertop, and when I left the library, I remembered that, oh my gosh, like I left my phone in the library. So I went back, and actually on the ground floor, like the security had my phone. And I remember another time my friend left her laptop on the bus. She had gotten off the bus and then she realized like, oh, I think I left my laptop there. So she got into a cab, and like the cab basically tracked down the bus, and the bus driver had her laptop. So generally very, very safe. Another thing that really surprised me was the fascination with everything Korean. So by that I mean K-pop, K-drama, Korean fashion, Korean beauty, just everything Korean. Like everyone seems to be obsessed. Something that I really liked was during the pandemic, they had all of these different vending machines set up, and you could just go there, swipe your ID, and it would just give you like a free mask. So that was generally quite helpful. Just the fact that, you know, at every community center you can get a mask, so you never have to worry about them running out. And I think they allocate like 2 per person. So just kind of like that efficiency of being able to set up that overnight. And along with like different things like just how they track people in and out as soon as you enter the mall. You scan your ID, take your temperature, so everything is very tracked. So something else that kind of shocked, and it's not very easy to talk about, is sometimes it's difficult for brown people to get places to rent. So specifically for me, when I was looking around for apartments in this particular condo, I looked at 3 different apartments here, and one of the landlords basically did not want to rent to me. I think the agent said that they don't want to rent to Indians or Pakistanis because they're worried that they'll cook curry and the curry stains will just kind of like, I guess, ruin the kitchen. So he was telling me that he would paint me out to be like a nice local Singaporean girl, and for him, I just told him like, you don't have to do that. Like, I'll find another apartment to rent if they don't want to rent to me. So I think that has been a little bit of a challenge in terms of just finding places to rent if not all landlords want to rent to people who look like me. When you go down these like HDB blocks, those are like the local housing, you'll find that everyone kind of has this rod hanging out of their kitchen window, and that kind of has a whole bunch of like clothes hanging off. So, you know, when you kind of see that for the first time, like you don't think like, oh my gosh, this is Singapore. It kind of looks like, I don't know, Taiwan, Hong Kong. And in fact, the first time that I lived in an HDB, and a lot of these HDBs, because they don't come with like dryers, you're kind of forced to like dry your clothes outside. So I remember taking this huge rod, and it's probably like 4 times my height. I don't know, definitely heavier than me. And I really struggled with kind of like lifting it up and like putting it outside. For the longest time, like I was honestly scared to just hang my clothes outside because of how heavy that rod is. Like I was like, oh my gosh, what if it falls? Like eventually I did get the hang of it, so that worked out. I guess it's kind of like a known fact that Singapore is generally very expensive, but I think that until you actually start living here, you don't really like, it doesn't really affect you so much. So when you look at like prices of rent, for example, like I feel like renting a condo, like just renting an apartment in Singapore is as good as renting an apartment in like downtown New York. It's very expensive. You know, a 1-bedroom can be 2,000 SGD upwards a month. And when it comes to like groceries, like a box of Cheerios can be $12. Like, you know, ice cream can be like 20 bucks almost if you want the good kind. And generally anything that like is cheese, meat, dairy, like all of those things are easily like, I think 3 times the price of what they would be in the States. So definitely a big culture shock, the prices. The first conversations are always around, what is your residency status? What is your visa? Do you live in an HDB or a condo? And how much do you pay for rent? So I think that all these things are very like personal questions, and I always feel a little bit uncomfortable when people ask me like, oh, how much do you pay for rent? I think the working culture is also a little bit different compared to the States. So for example, working the 9 to 5 isn't really like a thing in Singapore. I feel like it's always like a 9 to 6, 9 to 6:30 or 7. I've had clients call me as early as 9:30 a.m. on Sunday. I've had to work on public holidays sometimes. So generally not a very clean line between work-life balance. Maybe that has something to do with like how ambitious people are, or like just generally it's always like a very hustle work culture. Something that in terms of working that's kind of been difficult for me is a lot of times people speaking Mandarin. So I've been in meetings where people will suddenly start speaking in Mandarin, and I'm just kind of like sitting there a little bit clueless, a little bit like not really knowing how to respond when everyone around me is speaking a different language. I think recently I was working somewhere where the girl sitting behind me basically kind of stood up and spoke Mandarin to the guy sitting in front of me, like just basically over my head. And I can't help but wonder like if they're talking about me or like just generally like what is happening. So getting used to like people speaking different languages outside of English in the workplace, that has been something to get used to. So something else that comes to mind is the way that people socialize. I feel like in most of the barbecues, dinners, different social situations that I've been in, it's always been like either only expats or only locals. So I feel like it's, and I'm not too sure why that is, but generally like if I've gone to a dinner, like the dinner has only been with like people who are locals, or if I've gone drinking, it's only been with other expats. So I don't know, maybe this is just my experience, but I don't think that there's too much of locals and expats really hanging out, unless they're like co-workers and they're just getting drinks right after work. I feel like there's a lot of like compare culture. And I remember once sitting at lunch with like a group of girls, and they were all comparing like their bags and how expensive their bags were. Like, oh, my bag is $400, oh, my bag is $600. But they were kind of boasting about like, oh, my lunch is only $3, my lunch is only $5. So it feels like a lot of people seem to think more about like the brand names that they have and how much they spend on those brand names, as opposed to like how much they spend on like the food that they're eating. So this last one isn't exactly a Singapore culture shock, but it's definitely something that surprised me. I never thought that I would meet my life partner, Robbie, here. I never thought that my family would be Singaporean. And I think that through Robbie and his family, Singapore definitely feels a lot more like home. I definitely feel more of this sense of belonging and less of an outsider because of, you know, meeting him and his family, and how caring and loving all of them are towards me. And if you're an expat in Singapore who's watching this, let me know if there are any other culture shocks that you experience, maybe something else about Singapore that really surprised you. Let me know in the comments down below.